is the right to tell what they do not want to hear. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Tired of the same repetitive government narratives? Then wave goodbye to the distractions and rhetoric of corporate media. For this is Anti-Media Radio.
But I want to get the language right.
The big government is in trouble.
You're all a bunch of slaves! A bunch of slaves!
What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
What's your definition of media?
And now, here's your host, S.M. Gibson.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and this is Anti-Media Radio, October the 8th, 2015. Y'all are in store for a very interesting show this evening. We are joining the studio here tonight with the Libertarian Party of Alabama, Mr. Kevin Knight. Kevin, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, buddy. It's doing great. Been on a long road, driving back from Houston, Texas, all the way back to Goodall, Alabama, and I'm glad to be back. But and thanks for having me, too.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And we are expecting a special guest here in about 20 minutes or so. So stick around for that. I think it'll definitely be worth your time. Like we like to do at the beginning of every episode, go over a few statistics that the corporate media somehow neglects to report. So far this year, there have been 909 people killed by police officers in the United States of America. The reverse of that stat is there have been 99 officers that have died in the line of duty, but that statistic does include 29 by gunfire, 16 heart attacks, and 26 have passed away from automobile accidents. The city of Chicago, with their strict gun laws, obviously gun control, gun safety, that's been a big topic lately. Chicago is a city that they say they would like to model the rest of the country after. Well, just in 2015 alone, we have seen 2,362 people shot in the city of Chicago and 401 homicides. And as always, as we know, I can't get enough of talking about Saudi Arabia, America's great ally. 134, at least 134 executions this year, and most of those by beheading, and that doesn't include the 500 children that have been killed in Yemen from Saudi-led airstrikes since March the 28th of this year, and also over 2,300 civilians as well. Kevin, what's your take on the whole foreign policy thing going on right now? We've got the Syria crisis, and Russia's involved, and there's a lot of propaganda going around on all sides of it.
It is, man. It is. What can you say? This looks to me like the closest we've been to potentially a total global World War III. Unfortunately, this stuff. The American people said it made it loud and clear. The last, I think it was about a year or so ago, that they did not want us to go into Syria, and so we didn't. And look what's going on now. And now that ISIS has gotten bigger, it was interesting to see how many through the BBC's video. That you guys linked to on your page not too long ago, I believe. They broke it down and showed, it's so difficult to even understand and to fathom the amount of just treachery and craziness going on over there. Whose side, you really, anyways, morally, ethically, couldn't pick a side. And what bothers me, too, is that the American people, a lot of them are kind of falling in love with Putin and forgetting that, he's a dictator as well. So it's a crazy situation. I'm glad that, I can't say I'm not glad that there's now ISIS seems to be getting beaten back, but I think it's opening the door for a lot more further conflict.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think you're absolutely right about Putin because, he's definitely no saint.
No.
But at the same time, it is what it is. I mean, he's a propaganda machine as well, just like we are.
Right.
I think it appears, and I think it's the reason there's so many people that's like, well, Putin's doing a great job. It seems like, he's held back for so long in the region, as far as at least engaging in conflict.
Right.
And it seems like, well, he has his mission of what he's going to go in and do. And what it is, and we talk about this a lot, is it's not only to defeat ISIS, but it's to help keep Assad in power.
Right.
Absolutely.
Long-standing ties there, and and I've heard the argument made, and I don't know to what extent I kind of agree, but the argument that who else at this point, what can you do if Assad's forces, the U.S. without the U.S. getting fully involved, who else is going to beat back ISIS? Assad's forces are the only ones, they're on the ground, they're there, they know who they're dealing with. There's just so few options. There's no way for this to go in a positive direction whatsoever. If Assad goes, if Assad stays, either way, it's this. We're headed to a lot bigger conflict besides this, and it's going to be interesting, of course, to see where this goes. I saw earlier, you may have caught this, but the U.S. is now trying to put ground troops on the border between Syria and Turkey to kind of shield Turkey. So it's cranking up, and it's unfathomable to see. And what kills me is how it got started. We didn't belong in that area to begin with. So we're going to see what's our result if it's another foreign policy blunder that's going to really affect us and the country and the whole world. So
and somehow I think so many Americans and it's due to the politicians spewing the same rhetoric over and over and over is if you're not engaged over there and you back out, you're perceived as weak. And that's how they sell it. It's, but we have to have forces over there. And it's basically what's going on over there. It's a pissing contest. And now Putin's involved. It has nothing to do with our national security whatsoever. No. It has nothing to do with what's going on inside of our borders or to keep us safe or national defense. It's all about interest of people that aren't taxpayers.
Right. And are not loyal to any particular country or belief system other than advance their clique or their agenda. It's terribly unfortunate, and that innocent lives, are just getting destroyed by this. It's one thing for a jihadi to lose his life or a combat fighter, but the innocent people that are being killed every single day is just, it's hard to imagine, but it's going and it's going to get worse and worse and worse.
And somehow it hasn't. People don't realize is quote unquote terrorists. They're created when we're sitting here, someone bombs our house, half of our family's dead, and then we turn on the people that bomb us.
Right.
And they're calling that person a terrorist. But if that happened here, what would people be doing? They'd be out in the streets.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, blue helmets come marching through your city or your local town in the near future, as Henry Kissinger was kind of noted, got a little bit of notoriety for his quote about the UN coming in. I can't think of who would not stand up and fight back, and that's just natural thing to do. But yet, there's what do you call a terrorist these days now? Everybody's a terrorist now. So I'm not surprised that people are scrapping and don't care about the dang terrorism, but people are going to act and they're going to react. And
they've diluted that word from its true meaning.
Right. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because and when they're sitting there, telling you how many insurgents they've killed overseas or how many terrorists they've killed, they're talking, any male that's 18 years and over.
Right. It's so biased, and there's no telling how many people are really actually have been killed and written off as collateral damage as what the narrative that they're pushing with the Doctors Without Borders scenario.
Yeah, and what do you? So Obama finally came out and apologized.
Right, yeah, right. After a couple days, anyways, they're not outraged.
After 4 different stories from our government, first it was, we don't know if that happened. We're not real positive. 2, it could have happened. We're not sure. It accidentally could have hit it. 2, the third story was, the Afghans did it. We don't have to talk about it. It wasn't us. And then finally it was like, yeah, we did it. Sorry about that.
Right. Yeah, well, and I'll tell you what's going to happen ultimately is the U.S. is going to say that the Afghans, it was their intelligence, their faulty intelligence that led to this. Apparently, they're making the claim now that already that the U.S. is providing the air support, where Syria's guys are doing the ground. Afghanistan guys are actually fighting the Taliban. You probably know this, but the claim was made by Afghanistan forces to the U.S. military that the Taliban were actually fighting out of the hospital, the grounds, and so of course that's the reason why. So that's what the U.S. is going to go back to, I'm sure. So at the end of the day, I think we're going to see. With Doctors Without Borders, with their continued push, they're really demanding an investigation, as they should, and they should get it.
But here's a question. Okay, so we've heard Petraeus come out, former director of the CIA and former general, talk about how we should align ourselves with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in certain areas to fight ISIS. So, where do they define where they're the good guys and where they're the bad guys? They say, well, if we're fighting ISIS, well, they're the good guys, so we're going to fight with them. But in Afghanistan, we should bomb hospitals because of them.
Right.
And it makes absolutely no sense. And again, it just shows how schizophrenic the foreign policy really is.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because Foreign Policy Magazine, the mouthpiece, one of the mouthpieces for the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, they've been actually making this claim for a while. And in fact, last year, when the U.S. first tried to get engaged in Syria, they had made the claim that we really needed to join it, to link up with Al-Qaeda. And, it's amazing to hear that after, even if you don't believe the government's official story on 9/11, but you know that Al-Qaeda is fingered as the enemy. And to hear our own U.S. government, to hear the U.S. government suggesting that is the way to a peaceful resolution, it's crazy. We're completely living in an upside down world.
It really is, and the whole, I'm going to try to take a break from it tonight, but I've got to throw it in here once. Saudi Arabia. The whole human rights argument just drives me crazy. It shows the complete hypocrisy of our country, and I go on and on and on and on and on about the human rights violations that Saudi Arabia commits. They're endless, and it's ridiculous, but it goes to show you how hypocritical our government is. They pal around with each other. Not a word is ever said. They're made the head of the UN Human Rights Council.
I mean, if that's not, that is,
If Iran did half of the stuff they did.
Oh, gosh. It's crazy. But very few people know. More people would point the finger at Israel as the puppet master or the one that's taking advantage of America the most, and few people even know that Saudi Arabia, I feel like anyways, really understand what's going on and see few people see that Saudi Arabia is one of the people that pushes a lot of this fundamental Wahhabism and spreads it. They basically export terrorism, and yet we're just right there in bed with them.
Can you imagine if Syria or Iran had 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11?
Oh, God.
There'd be a hole.
Oh, yeah. The
a nuke. They would drop the nuke.
Oh, yeah. The day after, yeah.
And
everybody would stand up and applaud and say, yeah, that's what needed to be done.
But when it's Saudi Arabia, it's like, it wasn't Saudi Arabia. We got to figure out something else.
Right.
It just, the complete hypocrisy of the entire situation. So Rand Paul came out past day or two and said that he believes that a no-fly zone over Syria is basically a step towards World War III.
Oh, I agree completely. It has to be. Obviously the Russians have been providing a lot of the air cover. How does the U.S. government expect not to get in a situation that further escalates when you're trying to tell basically that, hey, Russia, you came all the way over here, you have a plan, but just don't put your planes in the sky. That's impossible. And how are you going to enforce that? You're going to start shooting people down, shooting planes down. Have to, and that's just I think it's a really stupid move of the authorities that are making these decisions.
It absolutely. I want to introduce our guest for the evening. It is a I guess young man. We're the same age, but running for U.S. Senate in the state of Florida. He has recently made headlines around the country for something we'll talk to him a little bit about. But Mr. Augustus Sol Invictus, sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
I can't complain. So you are running as the Libertarian candidate for Marco Rubio's seat down in Florida.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, and you have made headlines, I guess, in the past week, and you seem very open about your life, and you don't seem to hide from anything. When you announced that your candidacy, you said you want an honest politician, so you seem pretty open about everything. I guess the goat and the goat's blood, you made headlines. Before we even get into that, tell us what led you to run, why you're running, and what you hope to change.
Yeah, sure. What led to me running, and the reason I'm running is, it's like a decade-long story at this point. I used to work at a pharmacy as a pharmacy technician, and one day the DEA came in and raided the pharmacy and put us all out of work, and I had a wife and 4 kids at the time, and we were destitute at that point. So I became homeless and lived in my car while I went to college, and my family had to move back to Orlando and live in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I was pretty upset about it, and I swore vengeance on the DEA that day, and I said one day I would go into politics and shut them down, and that's what I've been doing this whole time.
So, running as a Libertarian candidate, do you feel that the state of Florida is ready for a third-party candidate to win that seat?
I don't know whether any state in the union is ready for that. Libertarians have not historically won federal office. By my count, I don't think we've ever gotten more than 4%. That might be a bit inaccurate, but tops it's been close to 5%. So if you need at least a third of that vote to win, it's not realistic, really.
So let's say I tell you what, if it's okay with you, go into kind of some of your past a little bit and some of the rumors. I guess clear some of that up for everybody.
Okay.
Go ahead and explain to everybody the whole goat situation.
Right. Well, you said at the opening here that I had come out in the beginning saying I'd be open about my past, and I said in that announcement speech, there are people who are going to bring things up, and it's going to be all about my past, and they're going to try to run me through the mud, but these are people interested in the system, and they're people with vested interest in this, and you've got to look past that to the issues. And this is exactly what I had predicted. Maybe not the goat thing, but this situation generally. So this was leaked by a guy in the OTO, and he had led my expulsion from the order back a couple years ago. And I had gone on a pilgrimage to the Mojave Desert back in the spring of 2013, and I walked from here in Orlando up to I-40, and then walked I-40 out to California, and I went out there to go into the desert and to pray and fast, and then I went to the Grand Canyon to pray and fast, and then to the Kaibab Forest to do the same. And I didn't expect to make it across the country because I had never done anything like that before, and I certainly didn't expect to make it out of the desert alive. So I went out to the wilderness just expecting that I was going to die out there. I never really thought I'd make it back, and so making it back to the East after all that, I was pretty thankful and still am. So I came back here, and the goat sacrifice was part of a Thanksgiving ritual to the God of the wilderness for having allowed me to live through it.
Okay, so for everybody that wanted to know about the goat, there it is. There's a story.
Right.
Another couple of other things, and I know you've gone online and rebutted some of this, but for people that don't know and haven't gone on there and read it, there's a lot of stuff tied to you supporting eugenics and
right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that supposedly you said that minorities or women shouldn't vote. Is that true? Is that being misconstrued? Explain your side of it.
Right. So the eugenics part is technically true because I did write a paper promoting eugenics when I was in law school. I wrote it because I was a staff writer for one of the law journals there at DePaul. At the time, I did mean it. I meant every word of it. I thought that the best thing for states to do for the betterment of humanity would be to implement state-sponsored eugenics programs. Since my entry into the practice of law and since my entry into the political world, I've totally disavowed the policy aspect of that paper. I don't think that should be a power of the government. As far as the women and minorities voting thing, that is a deliberate misconstrual by Adrian Wiley, who's the one making all these accusations. There are certain writings out there of mine that are political philosophy. My undergraduate degree was in philosophy, and my graduate degree is in law. And I wrote something on democracy and the rule of law, and I think the point of the paper was a critique of mass democracy. And I don't remember the exact verbatim wording of this, but it said something to the effect of, look, people are going to point to, women's suffrage and minority suffrage and say, well, this means that democracy is the most enlightened form of government. But when you look at mass democracy, does it really work? And is this really the best form of government? And is this better than what our forefathers created? And those are scholarly questions. Those are questions of political theory and scientific inquiry. And a lot of people took that out of context and says, oh, well, this guy hates women and blacks. I mean, he must be a racist, sexist piece of garbage. So it's just taken out of context. But if you read the whole thing, I think it's clear that paper was a critique of mass democracy.
Okay, so to be fair and to clear it up from your critics, like you think everybody's equal and all should have the right to vote? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So to be fair, to answer your critics, you believe that women, minorities, everyone is equal and they should have the right to vote. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes. I do, however, critique the fact that we want more and more people to vote. And there's this movement about, well, we should let everyone vote on the internet and we should just make it so accessible. And I reject that trend, not because I don't want more and more people to vote, but because it seems to cheapen the entire idea of voting. I think democracy requires that we be engaged, that we as citizens are active in the democracy, and allowing 18-year-olds to vote. It used to be 21. We've lowered that. Lowering it to 16 would be including more people, but does that make it more meaningful? And if you put it on the internet and allow people to vote on the internet, and they're no longer standing in line, it's no longer a social process, does that make democracy better? And those are the questions I'm trying to ask. Not to say these people should not be voting, but you've got to keep in mind what makes democracy work, and I don't think encouraging people's apathy is the way to go about it.
Okay, so you clearly are someone that doesn't fall into the two-party system, and a lot of the stuff that I've heard you speak about on some of your videos online, you're very much against the system in general. Why, somebody that is against the system, are you choosing to inject yourself into the system running for office?
Right, that's a fair question. On the one hand, look, from a purely Machiavellian perspective, if you want to look at it that way, in real politics, there is something to be said for speaking outside of the system, but at the same time, if you want to get the attention and get the message out there, what more effective way is there than to use the system against itself? And I think that is one point I made in one of the more well-known speeches, A Call for Total Insurrection, that you have to use the system against itself if you want to stop it. On the other hand, I've said before, I think there are still avenues of legitimate political activity. And I think the message that people should be active in their government is still a valid message. And the system that our forefathers set up, it's not a bad system. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. What's wrong with it is the apathy and the laziness that we've shown toward it, and we've allowed special interests to come in and control it. So I think by putting myself out there and running for public office, I'm making the point and taking a stand and saying, look, there still is room for legitimate activity. You don't need to resort to violence or to mob mentality or anything like that. If we can all come together and do this thing, then maybe we can make it work.
Okay, so one more thing on your past, and I'll get off that. The whole Civil War thing, did you?
Yes.
Okay, did you? Explain that to everybody. Okay, so for people that don't know, you supposedly kind of disappeared and we're going to start a civil war, which is, again, opposite of running for office. And kind of, it seemed like you wanted to become a revolutionary in your mind, or were, I don't know. Explain that.
Well, I don't think I've given up being a revolutionary, and I still consider myself one. I do try to use the legitimate processes of government presently, but I am not discounting anything else. I think if democracy does fail, and if people come together and try to make a change and the powers that be still stop it, then it is incumbent upon us to change it anyway. I've had a lot of heat for saying things about Civil War, and they actually tried to expel me from the Libertarian Party because of it. They say that I've been calling for war and trying to foment a war of aggression, and I think that is a false perspective. I've made the point that the government is already at war with its people. It has been for 40 years at least, and we have been funding that war. The only question is, when are the citizens of this country going to wake up to that fact and start fighting back? And that is self-defense. That is not a war of aggression on the part of the citizenry. I'd also distinguish that from what I was talking about in that letter. That letter, and elsewhere, I have said that I see a cataclysm coming. And that might have seemed a little over the top and dramatic and, prophetic, but I really do think that this catastrophe is coming, and I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. So there are people who say there's going to be a financial collapse, or Obama's going to implement martial law, or some other thing is going to happen that is going to turn this country to total chaos. So I'm not the only person who thinks it. I'm probably just the only public figure who's saying it out loud, and I think that terrifies people.
Okay, so let's say you woke up tomorrow and you took Rubio's place and you're in the Senate and you've got to work with 99 other members. Obviously, that's going to be an uphill battle. How would you approach that, especially with, your different philosophies and with the drug war? How would you approach dealing with Congress?
Right. So, despite my reputation as a son of a bitch, I really am like a reasonable person. I would like to think I can work with people on a rational level. Like in my law practice or in the running of my law practice, which is the business aspect, I do have to work with people. I'm not always trying to overthrow every table in every dining room I walk into. There is something to be said for cooperation, every now and then I would be willing to admit there is room for compromise on certain issues. As far as ending the drug war, I am not very much open to compromise, but I do realize there are political realities that have to be addressed. On the other hand, that being said, I think the main virtue of having been elected to the Senate, should that happen, would be that I am allowed to speak on the Senate floor. And if I am allowed to speak on the Senate floor, I think America would listen to what I'm saying. I think a lot of people, they discount what Congress people say because it's boring to watch C-SPAN. It's boring to watch speeches on the Senate floor. But I'd like to think that I could shake things up to the point that the country would have to pay attention to libertarian policies. And even if I'm the only libertarian there, I'd be able to put pressure on the Republicans and Democrats because the country will wake up to the fact of what they are doing, and something would have to give.
Okay. Say that I will say this. You talk about C-SPAN being boring. Watching some of your speeches, one you mentioned earlier, where you start talking about strip clubs and dark metal, like that was very interesting. I have to say.
Yeah, so it kind of seemed like it was like two different speeches kind of combined a little bit. I was kind of interested in seeing what your aim was. Was there something else that you were trying to say, or was that, in essence, was that it? Can you kind of further explain what your message in that was, and do you think that would be successful as far as bringing more positive attention to your campaign?
Okay, I'm sorry, there was a little bit of an echo, but what I heard the question being was the LSD and strip club part of that speech. Do I think that will bring positive attention to the campaign?
More or less. Well, I was just, I think both of us were a little surprised to see that you included that in the speech, and so we didn't. That's kind of curious as to why you felt the need, or did you care at all if that would bring you or your campaign negative attention?
Well, I'm sure it will bring negative attention, but at the same time, it has brought positive attention. On the one hand, controversy sells, so that's always
I think we'll always. I think we all agree there.
Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, there was an actual point to that. I wasn't just throwing out the most random, crazy stuff I could think of. The whole point of the speech was there needs to be a total cultural shift in this country. And if you think that electing one person to office is going to save the world, you're out of your mind. If you want to cause that cultural shift, you need to start transgressing boundaries. You need to start questioning preconceived notions. The LSD part might have been a bit outrageous, but at the same time, LSD does cause you to question reality itself and all of your notions of reality, and I don't think that's a bad idea. At the same time, the point of that speech was not to encourage every man, woman, and child to drop acid. It was to say you need to push past your personal boundaries, re-examine your life, and look again at everything around you and start questioning authority. And that was kind of the point of that whole paragraph in that speech.
Gotcha. Well, can I ask you, can we back up just a little bit? And how exactly did you come to libertarianism? Have you always been a libertarian?
Yes and no. I was raised a libertarian by my father. So that's the short answer. But the longer answer would be growing up, like anyone, I rebelled and went all over. I'm sure you can dig up my voter registration history. See, I've been a Republican, a Democrat, an NPA, mostly because Florida is a closed primary state, and you have to switch parties to vote in primaries. Everybody does it here. But at the same time, I've explored all sorts of different political philosophies. I wouldn't say I've ever identified as a communist, but I certainly have learned from them. Same with fascism, same with anarchism, progressivism, all these things, they've shaped who I am, but all in all, I've always been a libertarian, and that's just what I was raised to be.
Now, I have to say, and maybe you can elaborate on this a little more about what specific points you took away from some of the different philosophies you just mentioned. But as far as fascism and libertarianism, they couldn't be further apart from each other. So, what aspects of that?
Right. Okay, that's a fair question. Well, let's take fascism specifically, because I've been accused of being a fascist, so this is probably a good time to address that. There is something that the Libertarian Party does not seem to understand, and that is that people have to be unified in order to effect political change. Libertarians, we tend to be excessively individualistic. If you try to organize libertarians to do something, it's like herding cats.
I think that's true. I think it's the nature of libertarianism.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the sort of people that the party attracts, is ruthless individualists, people who want nothing to do with systems. But there's a weakness in that, and that weakness is that they cannot come together a lot of the times to get past things and work toward a common goal. And we've seen that in the collapse of the Libertarian Party of Florida in the past week, where these divisions, people just can't get past them. And I think that's a weakness. So if you're looking to fascists, that is one thing they got right, and it didn't just come out of nowhere. The fascists were historically, and still are, virulently anti-communist. But at the same time, they learned from the communists in that aspect that they have to have a group and they have to come together to effect political change. And that's something that we as libertarians just have not caught on to yet. So that's one thing I think we can learn from fascists without saying we are fascists.
Yeah, I mean, so you definitely, do you feel like the most drawn to libertarianism, or do you feel like maybe you're your own philosophy and that's just the closest thing to you?
That is a fair question, because there are some points on the Libertarian official platform that I simply do not agree with, and I take some flack for that.
For example, tell us.
Well, one is the anti-abortion stance. So the official party platform is that abortion should be a free-for-all. And I've always disagreed with that. I thought when I came out against abortion on demand that I would get a lot of heat for it, but I actually found out there are a lot of libertarians who just plain disagree with that aspect of the platform. Another one, though, would be probably environmentalism. And I know a lot of environmentalists, they want to push this idea of a world government. They call them watermelons. You know, they're green on the outside, but they're red on the inside. And I understand that critique of environmentalists, but at the same time, you know, I just don't see this thing that libertarians push as pro-business as really being as pro-business as they say. It's more mindlessly pro-business in that they don't care about the environment at some point, and I think that's a problem. Sometimes the government just plain has to stop something. You can pollute an individual's farm or his water, and sure, you can give him the right to file suit, but that doesn't mean he has the resources to do it. Sometimes the government just has to do something to protect the land and the people in it. And another is immigration. I think that's probably the third big one. Modern libertarians, they're very much about open borders, no tariffs, everyone can come and go as they please, and I'm more on the conservative end, thinking we have to have some sort of reasonable restriction on immigration. But otherwise, I think I'm pretty much in line with the Libertarian Party's official platform.
Yeah, very interesting. So, ultimately, I guess, are you running to win, or are you running to promote either you or your ideas?
Mm-hmm.
If maybe those are the same, and if you are running to win, how do you expect to overcome the hurdles that are in front of you?
Right. So I have always gone at this as I am intending to win. And I've been advised by several people that this in the beginning that this was a chance to promote my law firm and to get my name out there and just use this for my own benefit, because that's what people do when they run for office. You know, how many people are running for president right now, and they know they have no shot in hell of winning, but they're running anyway because they know it's going to sell them more books, and it's going to get them a lot of publicity, and once the race is done, they'll make oodles of money. And I've always thought of that as quite distasteful, if not dishonorable, because the point of running for public office is to do your country a service, and that's what I've always been out to do. If I differ from the party platform, I find that a virtue. I think it's one of the problems of our country that people are controlled by their parties, that candidates are not allowed to think for themselves, that if they diverge from their party's platform, they get crucified by the party leadership. And that's why I like the Libertarian Party, is because I would think I'm allowed to think for myself. And if I do that, I don't see it as I'm promoting my own ideology or promoting myself. I see it as I am given the liberty to put forward what I think would be best for the country, even if the Libertarian Party leadership doesn't agree 100%.
Gotcha. And where would you stand? I think I kind of have an idea of which direction you go. But as far as the NAP, we've seen growing arguments from some so-called libertarians who are arguing that we need to abandon the NAP and basically write it off, that it's an outdated theory. But where do you stand on the non-aggression principle?
Right now, I have signed the non-aggression principle, and it is an oath that I have taken, so I abide by it. That being said, I agree with those people. I think the non-aggression principle is ridiculous in a sense that it cripples the party, it cripples all people in the party, and it's something that needs to be done away with, especially the way that it's used today. So it's one thing to say, I don't agree with hitting people and taking their stuff, which is how Wes Benedict puts the non-aggression principle. I don't think that the government should be waging wars in other places just so we can take their oil, and that's fine. But that's not how it's applied today. How it's applied today is how the party leadership has reacted to my candidacy. They don't like me, so they blacklist me, and they say, oh, well, he's violated the non-aggression principle, which is untrue. And it's something that I'm not the first person this has happened to. Anything that someone doesn't like, they point to that and say, well, that's a violation of the non-aggression principle. And as long as you're the reigning crowd in the party, you can do that to anybody. And it doesn't matter whether you blackmail someone, which has been done to me, or you try to force them out of the party, which has been done to me, or you try to attack their family, which has been done to me. None of that violates the non-aggression principle as long as you're in control. So the NAP has become just this weapon to use for any dissident in the party or anyone you don't agree with. And to that end, I think it should be abandoned. But there's also, Adam Kokesh and a couple others, they say civil war does not violate the non-aggression principle. And it's a minority view, but I agree with it. And I think this whole non-aggression principle is just a divisive thing that people just use to say, well, I'm uncomfortable with that. Therefore, you have violated the non-aggression principle, and you're not a real libertarian, so now I don't have to talk with you, and this debate is over. So to that end, I think we should abolish it.
Okay, so you definitely seem, whether people agree with you or disagree with you, you definitely seem to stand by the things that you believe in. Why would you sign the non-aggression principle, and yet you just outlined a whole bunch of reasons why it should be abandoned?
Well, because I'm a libertarian, and if you're going to run for office and be part of the Libertarian Party of Florida, it's something you have to abide by. At the same time, I don't really see it as a conflict right now because I am, like I said, running to show that legitimate political processes exist. If you can use the political system and you can make it work by an active citizenry, then there is no need to aggress whatsoever. And if the government is waging war on its people, then defending yourself is not a violation of the non-aggression principle. So I really don't see it as a conflict. And I don't think any of my views conflict with the non-aggression principle. I just think that the NAP itself is a burden to the party, and it's a way to cause further division instead of being a unifying principle, which is what it was meant to be.
So here's a question for people to, I guess, a little bit about your background as far as your professional life. You talked about practicing law. What kind of law do you practice? I know you've stated that you practice law in 4 different states, I believe it is.
Practice is a strong word. I mean, I've had cases in a couple different states, and I'm a member of the bar in 4 states, but I tend to practice only in Florida. And I do, to answer your question, I do criminal defense.
And is it mainly to do with drug cases, given that you
Actually, yeah, it is. I have done cases that run the gamut. I mean, I've done armed robbery, murder, technically domestic terrorism. It was really paramilitary training. But yeah, I've done all sorts of cases, but I try to stick with drug trafficking because that's what I'm most passionate about.
I take, real quick, like, I take away from you, especially watching you some of your speeches, really strong, like, it seems to me like you've studied a lot of JFK, Malcolm X, maybe even some of the Panthers a little bit. Am I wrong in that?
No, absolutely not. You're correct. I actually remember one night, I tend to read random passages out of books to my kids, and I make them question, why did the writer say this? What is he getting at? And I remember one night in Thornton Park, I was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I've always looked up to Malcolm X. I've always thought that he was right on point about a lot of things, and I respect his transition at the end, toward the end of his life, away from violent means, and I think he realized it wasn't effective. I've always looked up to him for that, but as far as his social critiques, he was always right on point, and I've never been fearful of looking to people with whom I disagree to learn from them. And that goes for Malcolm X, that goes for Frantz Fanon, any sort of leader or thinker like that.
So, okay, that leads me to say, because I know you've been accused of this, you've kind of written it, do you believe that violence or aggression is anything that's really needed to progress us now, or do you feel like it's possible for us to come together of, all races, everybody come together and unite as one, or do you feel like it needs to be violent?
I think that there is something to be said for both sides. I would like to be optimistic and think that we can all come together, but I am also very aware of the ancient maxim that says if you want peace, then prepare for war. So we can all say we should all come together. We should all work together.
Allow me to play devil's advocate real quick. That is kind of a neocon line, though. War is peace. And we'll go overseas to bomb a bunch of people so you can be safe.
Well, I would debate that point with you, sir, because there's a difference between preparing for war and preemptive war. So what the neocons do, they say, well, Iran is going to build this thing, so we need to go in there and bomb the hell out of them so that they can't do it, because if they get around to this nuclear program, they're going to destroy Israel. That's preemptive war. Preparing for war is saying we need a strong country, therefore we need to train our military, and we need to have the arms necessary to defend our country if necessary. So those are two completely different concepts. I'm not at all advocating that we should go into other countries because we think they're going to bomb an ally, or we don't agree with their leader. Preemptive war is not a part of what I'm advocating here.
So you do believe, though, that there is an aspect of us that needs to, like in this country alone, just domestically, that we should prepare for violence?
Yeah, I really do. I think all individuals should be prepared for that eventuality. I think everyone should be trained physically. I think they should learn the use of firearms, or at least learn to be comfortable with them, because there's a growing trend in this country where guns are, something from the devil. I think people need to be a little more individualistic, and they need to think, one day, maybe the government won't be taking care of me. And that's where I tend toward anarchism, I think, and the individual should be the center of responsibility.
Okay, so of all the different things you could run for, why did you say U.S. Senate?
Well, actually, I had always been gunning for Senate because of that story I told you in the beginning with the DEA. However, I had set my sights lower. I was going to run for the 10th District of the House of Representatives here in Orlando, which is, part of Orange County and most of Lake County and some of Polk County here in Florida. And I was going to run for that, and then after we had geared up the campaign team, after we had got everything in order and everything was ready to go, as if by magic, Marco Rubio said, "Hey, I'm running for president." And that opened up his seat, and that made the race for Senate a total free-for-all. So it actually seemed like the better opportunity, because here in the 10th District, Daniel Webster is an institution, and it would be impossible to beat him. We actually have better chances going after the Senate because there is no incumbent, and everything is up in the air right now. It's total chaos down here.
Fair enough. All right, one last question. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm going to let you kind of expound on this and go wherever you want with it. The whole, your religion, Aleister Crowley, that whole thing, so people have a better understanding of that from you.
Whew. Oh, man, that's a big question. So basically, what is my religion? What's it about, kind of thing. All right. Well, Aleister Crowley came from a tradition of British occultists. These guys were trained in Hermetic magic. It was a fraternal order, this Golden Dawn. It's a fraternal order like the Masonic traditions. Crowley came from that, and he kind of went out on his own. He went to Egypt, and he received these 3 chapters after 3 different days, and those became the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law is the foundational text of Thelema, and it's divided into 3 chapters. The first is for the goddess, Nuit. The second is for the god, Hadith. And the third is for Rahor Kuwait, who is the god of war and of vengeance. It's a manifestation or a version of Horus. So, all arcane imagery aside, Thelema says that this is a resurrection of paganism, and there is a procession of the equinoxes. So there used to be, long ago, a matriarchal society, worship of the goddess, and all that entails. Following that was patriarchal society. You saw the coming of Judeo-Christianity and Islam, and now, as of the 20th century, we see the coming of Horus, the Avenger. Crowley saw that this was instituted with the Great War of 1914, and that is what we are living in now, according to Thelema. But it's very individualistic, and it's very much saying that all of these old systems are done, and there are new systems and new ideas to be had, and the individual, every man and woman is a star, is what Thelema says, and every man and woman has his or her individual destiny. I think that's putting ethics back into the hands of the individual, putting personal responsibility back to the individual, and taking it away from divine command theory. And I think those are some good points to make about Thelema. But that's a pretty open question, man.
Fair enough. So when you end a speech and you say, God bless my campaign, and God bless America, when you say the word God, what are you referring to?
Right. So I am a Thelemite specifically, but more broadly, I identify as a pagan. Paganism sees all of the universe to be the interplay of the God and the goddess. Judeo-Christianity is very much patriarchal. It's very centered on the God. Paganism is centered on the balance between the masculine and the feminine, and that's what I believe in. So when I say, may the goddess bless our campaign and God bless the United States of America, I am referring to that. I see the God and the goddess as totally equal.
Well, all right. Well, I tell you what, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Is there any thing that you didn't get to mention that you would like to mention to everybody before we have to go?
No, man. I think we covered pretty much a lot of bases, and thank you so much for having me on it, giving me the opportunity to explain all these things, man.
Absolutely, no problem. You have a good one.
You too, man. Thank you very much again.
Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Augustus Sol Invictus. He is running for U.S. Senate in the state of Florida for the Libertarian Party. Again, he has made national news in the past week as sacrificing a goat. He kind of explained his version of that. Yeah, Kevin, that was a very interesting conversation.
It was. He did what he did to address some of the issues, but he was pretty candid about it. Didn't seem to be ashamed whatsoever. Not that he should be, I guess.
I mean, I'll be honest. It's not my belief system. It's not how I think with it. But he is honest in what he says. And my biggest concern going into the conversation was the whole topic of him saying that women shouldn't vote or minorities shouldn't vote, and he views really anybody not as equal as everybody else. Like that was my biggest concern, and he addressed that. So that is what that is.
Well, he was really open to answering whatever question. So I was glad to see that. He didn't seem to be trying to jump around him or to divert or misdirection. So it was good. It was a good interview. I appreciate him coming on and answering a few questions.
Absolutely, and we definitely got to mention the strip club up in here,
right?
Because that's definitely the first time I've ever heard a political candidate of any party for any race mention going to the strip club
and LSD. What a way to finish a speech, huh?
I guess it was. Absolutely. So yeah, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on tonight. It's been fantastic conversation. I wish the news that we started the show with was a little bit more positive, but that's kind of the world we're living in now, as far as the preemptive World War III.
Yeah, really, that's where we're headed.
Yeah, so it appears. But ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate everyone listening tonight. And again, I thank our guests, Augustus Sol Invictus, running for U.S. Senate in Florida. Wow, interesting stuff. It went a lot different than I thought, and it was what it was.
Yeah, he
very candid.
I kind of did find it interesting. His accent
changed a little bit.
Yeah, it did change a little bit. It wasn't the strong Southern accent that I'm used to hearing in a lot of his videos.
Yeah, and he's got that, like we talked a little bit before the show. His the way he kind of delivered his speeches and the way a Bobby Kennedy or a John Kennedy would, and I brought that up to him, but definitely a little different cadence in his voice tonight.
Right, definitely.
Thanks, everybody, so much for tuning in tonight. Thank you, Kevin, for sitting in.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Augustus, for joining us on the show. We'll be back next week. Join Nick on Monday. I'm SM Gibson. This is Anti-Media Radio. Out.
Peace.
I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go